October 4th, 1997. The National Mall in Washington, D.C. stretches before you, but you can't see the grass. You can't see the monuments. You can't see anything but an ocean of men. 500,000 of them, maybe more, standing shoulder to shoulder in complete silence. No women, no children, just men. They're not protesting, they're not celebrating. They're praying. The largest religious gathering in American history is happening, and within a year, the organization behind it will be bankrupt, firing nearly its entire staff. Within a decade, it will be virtually forgotten. This is the story of Promise Keepers, the movement that filled stadiums across America and vanished like morning mist. The year is 1990, and Bill McCartney has a problem. He's the head football coach at the University of Colorado, riding high after winning a national championship. His Buffaloes are conquering the field, but McCartney's personal life is crumbling. His marriage is struggling. He's an absent father. Despite all his professional success, he feels like a failure where it matters most. One March evening, he's driving with a friend, Dave Wardle, and they're talking about men, faith, and the epidemic of broken families spreading across America. McCartney has an idea that seems almost absurd. What if they could fill a stadium with men committed to being better husbands and fathers? His friend thinks he's dreaming. Fill a stadium? With men coming together to talk about their feelings and faith? McCartney won't let it go. He starts calling it a vision from God. On July 20th, 1991, the first Promise Keepers event happens at the University of Colorado's basketball arena. McCartney is expecting maybe a few hundred guys. Instead, 4,200 men show up. They pay to be there. They cry openly. They hug strangers. They make promises to change their lives. Something is happening, and nobody quite understands what it is yet. These men are committing to 7 promises. The list is specific. Honor Jesus Christ through prayer, worship, and obedience. Pursue vital relationships with a few other men. Practice spiritual, moral, ethical, and sexual purity. Build strong marriages and families. Support the mission of the church. Reach beyond racial and denominational barriers, and influence the world while being obedient to the Great Commission. It's ambitious, it's bold. And in early 1990s America, it strikes a chord with men who feel lost in rapidly changing times. Let's understand what's happening in America at this moment. The 1980s has just ended, with its celebration of individualism and material success. The feminist movement has reshaped gender roles. Divorce rates are climbing. Movies and television are filled with bumbling, incompetent fathers used as punchlines. Men are being told they're toxic, unnecessary, obsolete. Many are confused about what being a man even means anymore. Then here comes Bill McCartney, a national champion football coach, telling them they matter, they're needed, they can be heroes in their own homes. The second event in 1992 draws 22,000 men. The third in 1993 packs 50,000 into Colorado's Folsom Field. That same year, Promise Keepers decides to go national. They book stadiums in 7 cities. Every single one sells out. By 1994, they're holding events in 13 cities, drawing a combined total of 278,000 men. These aren't small church gatherings. These are stadium events with professional production, worship bands that sound like rock concerts, and speakers who know how to work a crowd. But here's the twist. The speakers are crying. Tough guys are breaking down on stage, confessing their failures, admitting they've been terrible husbands and absent fathers. And instead of being turned off, the men in the stands are crying too. 1995 is when Promise Keepers becomes impossible to ignore. They hold events in 13 cities and draw 727,000 men. Some stadiums are selling out so fast they add second dates. The media starts paying attention. Who are these guys? What do they want? The events follow a pattern. Loud worship music, emotional testimonies, powerful speakers, and altar calls where thousands of men stream forward to make commitments. They're breaking down racial barriers too. Black pastors and white pastors share stages. Men of different races are encouraged to embrace each other, confess the sin of racism, and commit to breaking down walls. In a decade still dealing with the aftermath of the Los Angeles riots, This racial reconciliation aspect attracts both praise and skepticism. By 1996, the movement is at a full sprint. 22 events in stadiums across the country draw 1.1 million men. That's 1.1 million men who paid between $50 and $60 each to attend a religious event. Promise Keepers' annual budget swells to $117 million. They're employing 345 full-time staff members. They're producing books, study guides, and resources. Churches are forming Promise Keepers small groups. Your neighbor, your coworker, your brother-in-law, they're all going to these events and coming back changed. Or at least they say they are. But something else is brewing. The critics are getting louder. The National Organization for Women calls Promise Keepers a threat to women's rights. They see the emphasis on male leadership in families as a return to patriarchy. Patricia Ireland, now's president, warns that Promise Keepers wants to send women back to the kitchen. Feminist author Bell Hooks writes that the movement is about reasserting male dominance. But the criticism isn't just coming from the left. Some conservative Christians are uncomfortable too. They worry the movement is watering down theology, being too ecumenical, too focused on feelings rather than doctrine. Others question whether filling stadiums is really what Christian discipleship looks like. Hey, quick question for you watching right now. Where in the world are you tuning in from? And what's your profession? Drop it in the comments because I'm genuinely curious about who's interested in these obscure historical movements. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten history, this is Professor Archive, your home for stories that textbooks overlooked. If this channel brings you value, there's a super thanks button below the video. Just saying. All right, back to 1997, where everything is about to change. Bill McCartney and the Promise Keepers leadership make an announcement that shocks everyone. They're organizing a march on Washington. They're calling it Stand in the Gap, and they want to fill the National Mall with men committed to revival, reconciliation, and righteousness. The date is set for October 4th, 1997. Immediately, the backlash intensifies. Now organizes counter-protests. The media debates whether this is a religious revival or a political rally. The paranoia reaches fever pitch. Some critics warn this is the beginning of a theocratic takeover. Others mock it as a masculine identity crisis on a national scale. Promise. Keepers insist this isn't political. They're not endorsing candidates or pushing legislation. This is purely spiritual. But in Washington, D.C., how can anything be purely spiritual? The tension builds through the summer and fall. Churches across America organize buses. Men take vacation days. They're coming from every state, and nobody knows how many will actually show up. The organizers are hoping for 200,000. They'd be thrilled with 300,000. The media is skeptical. October 4th, 1997 arrives. The sun rises over the National Mall and the men start coming. They keep coming. Buses pour in from every direction. By mid-morning, the crowd is enormous. By afternoon, it's unprecedented. The National Park Service, which stopped giving official crowd estimates after the controversy of the Million Man March 2 years earlier, refuses to give a number. But everyone there can see it's massive. Independent estimates range from 500,000 to over 1 million men. The National Mall is covered with men standing, kneeling, praying, singing, weeping. Some have driven for days. Some have spent money they don't have. They're convinced they're part of something historic, a turning point for America. The event lasts 12 hours. Speaker after speaker calls for repentance, reconciliation, and revival. Men confess racism, pornography addiction, family neglect, and pride. The crowd is overwhelmingly peaceful, respectful, and emotional. They pick up all their trash. There are no arrests. When it's over, the men go home, believing they've witnessed a modern miracle. Promise Keepers looks unstoppable. Bill McCartney is vindicated. The organization has just pulled off the largest religious gathering in American history. They must be celebrating, right? Wrong. Behind the scenes, Promise Keepers is hemorrhaging money. Here's the problem they didn't anticipate. The Stand in the Gap event was free. They specifically decided not to charge admission because they wanted to make it accessible to everyone. Noble ideal, catastrophic financially. The event cost millions to produce. The organization had been running on razor-thin margins already, pouring everything into bigger events, more staff, and broader outreach. The free admission creates a budget crater they can't fill. 3 months later, in January 1998, Promise Keepers makes a devastating announcement. They're laying off their entire headquarters staff. All of them. From 345 employees to essentially zero overnight. Only the senior leadership remains. They also announced they're canceling stadium events for 1998 and instead focusing on free events in smaller venues. The stated reason is spiritual. They want to make the events accessible regardless of ability to pay. The real reason is they're broke. The math had stopped working. When you're paying for massive stadium rentals, professional production crews, international speakers, and maintaining a headquarters staff, you need that ticket revenue. When the tickets disappear, the whole model collapses. Promise Keepers has learned a hard lesson. Movements need sustainable economics. The layoffs are brutal. These aren't just employees. These are true believers who took pay cuts to work for the organization. Some have relocated their families to Denver to be part of this movement. Now they're being let go with minimal severance. The media, which had been skeptical but intrigued, turns harsh. Promise Keepers is mocked as a flash in the pan, a fad that couldn't sustain itself. The critics feel validated. See, it was all just hype and manipulation. If it were real, if men were truly changed, wouldn't they support the organization financially? But something more fundamental is happening. The cultural moment is shifting. The late 1990s are bringing unprecedented prosperity. The stock market is soaring. The internet is creating a new economy. Y2K paranoia is building. The urgency that drove men to stadiums in the mid-90s is dissipating. The movement had also, ironically, succeeded in one way. They'd saturated their market. How many times can the same guy go to a Promise Keepers event? Many men who attended in 1994 and 1995 and 1996 felt like they'd gotten what they needed. The novelty was wearing off. There's another factor rarely discussed. The movement was heavily dependent on Bill McCartney's personal charisma and credibility. But by 1998, McCartney is dealing with his own family crisis. His daughter Christy has become a prominent speaker for feminist causes, publicly critiquing the Promise Keepers' message her father champions. She argues that Promise Keepers' emphasis on male headship in families damaged women and didn't actually help men. The public tension between the founder and his daughter creates an uncomfortable optics problem. If the guy teaching millions of men how to lead their families can't prevent public conflict with his own child, what does that say about the message? McCartney also stepped down from the University of Colorado in 1994, giving up a lucrative coaching career to lead Promise Keepers full-time. That sacrifice gave him moral authority, but it also removed him from the public platform he'd built over decades. He was no longer appearing on ESPN every Saturday. He was no longer winning games. To younger men coming of age in the late 1990s, he's just some former coach their dads might remember, not the conquering hero he'd been in the early 90s. Promise. Keepers limps through 1998 and 1999 with smaller events, reduced staff, and a fraction of their former budget. They're still holding events and men are still attending, but the momentum is gone. The crowds are measured in hundreds or low thousands, not hundreds of thousands. The media has moved on. The controversy has faded because the movement itself has faded. By 2000, Promise Keepers is a shell of what it was just 3 years earlier. They're still technically operating, but they're irrelevant. What's fascinating is how complete the collapse was. In 1996, you couldn't escape Promise Keepers. They were in the news, in church conversations, debated on talk shows. By 2000, they're barely mentioned. It's like the whole thing was a collective dream. Millions of men had attended these events, made these promises, and then what? Life went on. Marriages still struggled. Men still felt lost. The promises were sincere, but sustaining change without ongoing structure and accountability proved nearly impossible for most guys. Some defenders of the movement argue it did create lasting change, just not visible at the organizational level. They point to men who genuinely did become better husbands and fathers, to churches where small groups continued meeting long after the stadium events ended, to racial reconciliation conversations that began at Promise Keepers events and continued in communities. The absence of a thriving organization doesn't necessarily mean the movement failed in its deeper goals. But that's a hard argument to make when the organization that was pulling in $100 million annually can barely pay rent within 2 years. Promise Keepers never officially died. That's part of what makes the story so strange. The organization kept existing through the 2000s and 2010s, holding occasional events, maintaining a website, publishing resources. They had a minor resurgence in the mid-2000s, filling some smaller arenas and partnering with churches for conferences. In 2008, they rebranded with a new initiative called The Revolution. It went nowhere. In 2020, they attempted another revival, announcing plans for major events in 2021 and 2022. Some events happened, drawing crowds in the thousands, but nothing approaching the scale or cultural impact of the 1990s. The question that haunts this entire story is this: what was Promise Keepers actually about? Was it a genuine spiritual movement that helped millions of men become better versions of themselves? Or was it emotional manipulation on a massive scale? Was it about reinforcing traditional gender hierarchies? Or was it about men genuinely trying to step up and take responsibility? The answer probably depends on who you ask. A man whose marriage was saved might give you a different answer than a feminist scholar analyzing the rhetoric. Both might be right. What's undeniable is that Promise Keepers tapped into something real in American men in the 1990s. There was a hunger, a sense of being lost, a desire for purpose and community that transcended the specific theology or politics of the organization. Men were willing to pay money, take time off work, travel to different cities, and openly cry in front of strangers because something in the message resonated. That wasn't manufactured. You can't fake hundreds of thousands of men showing up voluntarily, repeatedly. But Promise Keepers also reveals something about how movements work in modern America. They need more than just a compelling message. They need sustainable economics, adaptable leadership, and the ability to institutionalize change. Promise Keepers got the message right for its moment, but failed at sustainability. They expanded too fast, spent too much, and became dependent on ever larger spectacles. When the spectacle became financially impossible, there was no plan B that could maintain the same energy and engagement. There's also a generational component. Promise Keepers was primarily a baby boomer and early Gen X movement. The men filling stadiums in the mid-90s were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. They came of age before the sexual revolution was complete, before no-fault divorce became universal, before the internet changed everything. They had a specific set of anxieties and guilt about family and masculinity that resonated with Promise Keepers' message. Younger men, especially those coming of age in the 2000s and beyond, didn't connect with it the same way. The cultural context had shifted too much. Bill McCartney himself, now in his 80s, has mostly retreated from public life. He occasionally gives interviews where he reflects on Promise Keepers, usually with a mix of gratitude for what was accomplished and lingering sadness that it didn't last. He still believes the message was right, that men need to step up as spiritual leaders in families and communities. Whether that message will ever capture attention again on the scale it did in the 1990s seems unlikely. The broader men's movement in America has splintered into a dozen different directions since Promise Keepers peaked. Some men gravitate toward the modern mythopoetic retreats that combine psychology, spirituality, and ritual. Others find community in explicitly political movements, whether progressive men's groups focused on challenging toxic masculinity or conservative groups pushing back against what they see as the feminization of culture. Still others retreat into online communities, from Jordan Peterson fans to various sectors of the manosphere. None of them have achieved what Promise Keepers did, bringing together millions of men across racial, denominational, and even political lines around a shared sense of purpose. There's an irony in how Promise Keepers is remembered, or rather, how it's not remembered. For something that dominated headlines for several years and mobilized millions of people, it's remarkable how thoroughly it's been forgotten. Ask someone under 30 if they've heard of Promise Keepers, and you'll likely get a blank stare. Even many people who lived through the 1990s have only the vaguest recollection. Oh yeah, wasn't that those stadium things? It's become a historical footnote, a remember when curiosity rather than a movement people seriously study or try to emulate. But perhaps that's appropriate for a movement that was always more about the moment than the legacy. The men who attended those stadium events weren't thinking about creating an enduring institution. They were thinking about saving their marriages, connecting with their kids, finding some kind of purpose. Whether Promise Keepers as an organization survived wasn't really the point. The point was the experience, the emotion, the commitment made in that heightened moment of fellowship and conviction. Did those commitments last? For some, yes. For others, they faded as quickly as the stadium lights. That's probably true of any mass movement. The question isn't whether everyone changed permanently, but whether enough people experienced genuine transformation to justify the whole enterprise. And that's a question that can't really be answered with statistics or analysis. It requires individual stories, and those have mostly disappeared into private family histories. What Promise Keepers does demonstrate is the hunger for meaning and community that exists beneath the surface of modern American life. When that hunger is tapped effectively, people will show up in enormous numbers. They'll pay money, travel distances, make public commitments. But that hunger is fickle. It can be redirected, satisfied temporarily, or simply fade as life circumstances change. Building a sustainable movement requires more than tapping into hunger. It requires feeding it consistently, which turns out to be much harder than inspiring a crowd for a weekend. As we stand here decades later, what can we learn from the meteoric rise and equally dramatic fall of Promise Keepers? Perhaps that movements built on emotion and spectacle have a shelf life. Perhaps that addressing real needs isn't enough if the economic model is unsustainable. Perhaps that generational and cultural shifts can make even the most powerful message obsolete. Or perhaps just that history is full of things that seemed permanent and paradigm shifting in the moment, but became footnotes in the rearview mirror. The empty stadiums where men once wept and made promises are hosting football games and concerts now. The National Mall where 1 million men stood in silence hosts tourists and protesters and celebrations, each convinced their moment is the important one. And somewhere probably there are men who still remember that feeling, standing among thousands of other men, believing that this time, this commitment, this promise would be the one they kept. Some of them did, most of them didn't. And the organization that brought them all together discovered that promises are easier to make than to keep, whether you're an individual man trying to be better or a movement trying to change the world. The Promise Keepers saga isn't really about success or failure. It's about the gap between aspiration and reality, between the high of a transformative moment and the grind of everyday life. It's about how quickly cultural moments can pass, leaving behind only memories and questions about what it all meant. And maybe, just maybe, it's a reminder that the desire for meaning, purpose, and community is always there, waiting for the next movement, the next message, the next promise that this time will be different, until it's not.